My friends, have you ever noticed something strange about the human mind? Sometimes nothing is really wrong. The day is normal. Life is moving quietly. No crisis, no disaster, no real problem in front of you. And yet, inside your mind, there is tension. A conversation from earlier keeps repeating. A small comment someone made starts feeling bigger than it really was. A memory from years ago suddenly appears again. A worry about tomorrow quietly enters your thoughts. And before you even realize it, your peace is gone. What is strange is that most of the time, nothing outside actually took it away. It was the mind. The mind has a powerful habit. It turns small moments into heavy stories. It imagines problems that have not happened. It compares your life with others. It reacts too quickly to emotions. It believes every thought that appears. And slowly, without you noticing, these habits begin stealing your calm every single day. But here is the surprising truth Buddhist wisdom teaches. Peace is not something rare. Peace is actually the natural state of the mind. What disturbs it are the patterns of thinking we repeat again and again without seeing them. And the moment you begin to notice these patterns, something powerful starts to change. The mind becomes lighter. Reactions become slower. Situations that once felt stressful begin to lose their power. In this video, we will explore 10 powerful lessons from Buddhist wisdom that reveal the hidden habit quietly stealing your peace every day. And once you see it clearly, you may realize something that most people never discover. The peace you have been searching for was never far away. It was simply hidden beneath habits of the mind you were never taught to question. The mind turns small moments into heavy stories. One of the quiet habits that steals peace from many people is the mind's tendency to create stories about everything that happens. Most of the time, this process is so automatic that we do not even notice it. Something small takes place, and within seconds the mind begins interpreting it, filling the silence with meaning that may not actually exist. For example, imagine you greet someone you know, but they do not greet you back the way they normally do. In that moment, nothing dramatic has really happened. Perhaps they were distracted. Perhaps they were thinking about something important. Perhaps they simply did not hear you. But the mind does not like empty spaces. Almost instantly, it begins creating a story. Maybe they are upset with you. Maybe you did something wrong yesterday. Maybe they no longer respect you. The mind starts connecting pieces together, building a narrative that feels real, even though no one has confirmed it. A similar thing happens when someone does not reply to your message. A few hours pass, and the mind begins filling the silence with explanations. Maybe they are ignoring you. Maybe you said something that offended them. Maybe they are losing interest in you. Yet in reality, they might simply be busy. They might be working. They might have forgotten to check their phone. But the mind rarely waits patiently for facts. It rushes ahead and builds conclusions. This habit happens many times throughout the day. A look from someone, a tone in someone's voice, a short response, a delayed answer. These small moments are neutral in themselves, but the mind quickly transforms them into stories. And once the story is created, emotions begin to follow. A simple moment turns into worry. A small misunderstanding turns into stress. Something that lasted only a few seconds begins occupying the mind for hours. If you observe closely, you may notice something surprising. Most of the stories the mind creates are never confirmed. They exist only inside the mind. Yet the body reacts to them as if they are completely real. The heart becomes tense. The mood changes. Peace quietly disappears. Why does the mind do this? Because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. The mind prefers having an explanation, even if that explanation is not accurate. Silence feels like a gap that must be filled. So the mind fills it with assumptions. And very often, those assumptions lean toward the negative side. The human brain has a natural tendency to notice possible threats more quickly than neutral events. Long ago, this helped people survive danger. But in modern life, this same habit often creates unnecessary stress. Instead of seeing situations clearly, the mind fills them with imagined meanings. Buddhist wisdom gently reminds us that thoughts are not always reflections of reality. They are simply interpretations created by the mind as it tries to understand incomplete information. A thought can appear quickly and feel convincing, but that does not mean it is true. When people believe every story their mind creates, life slowly becomes heavier. Small situations start to feel like problems. Simple misunderstandings begin to grow into emotional burdens. But something powerful happens when you begin observing the mind more carefully. You start to notice the moment a story begins forming. Instead of immediately believing it, you see it as a thought appearing inside the mind. You realize that the mind is simply trying to explain what it does not fully understand. And in that moment, a small distance appears between you and the story. You begin to understand that thoughts are not commands. They are not facts that must be accepted. They are simply mental activity passing through awareness, like clouds passing through the sky. Some clouds look heavy, some look light, but eventually all of them move on. In the same way, thoughts come and go. When you stop automatically believing every story the mind creates, something inside begins to relax. The tension starts to soften. The mind becomes quieter. And you begin to see life more clearly, without the extra weight of stories that were never real to begin with. Making everything personal slowly exhausts the heart. One of the quiet habits that slowly drains a person's peace is the tendency to take everything personally. Many people do this without even realizing it. A small comment, a short message, a simple look from someone, and the mind immediately turns it into something about me. Someone speaks in a harsh tone, and the mind quickly assumes it must be because of you. Someone disagrees with your opinion, and it begins to feel like a rejection of your value. A person walks past you without greeting you, and suddenly the mind starts wondering if you have done something wrong. Little by little, the mind begins to connect other people's actions to your identity. This habit is extremely exhausting because it makes the heart carry weight that was never meant to belong to it. Think about how often people act from their own moods, their own stress, or their own problems. Someone might be worried about their job, thinking about their family, or struggling with something inside their own mind. In those moments, their behavior may become cold, distracted, or impatient. But when we take everything personally, we interpret their behavior as a reflection of our worth. A person who is quiet suddenly becomes someone who is upset with us. A person who is busy suddenly becomes someone who is ignoring us. A person who is frustrated suddenly becomes someone who is attacking us. The mind quietly turns other people's internal struggles into our personal burden. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion. The heart becomes sensitive to every small reaction from others. The mind begins scanning for signs of rejection, criticism, or disapproval. Life starts to feel like walking through a room full of invisible judgments. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something very important about human behavior. Most of what people say and do has very little to do with you. Every person is living inside their own world of thoughts, emotions, fears, expectations, and habits. Their reactions come from the condition of their own mind at that moment. A person who feels insecure may criticize others to feel stronger. A person who is carrying stress may speak impatiently without meaning to harm anyone. A person who feels overwhelmed may appear distant or uninterested. None of these reactions are truly about you, yet the mind often interprets them that way. This misunderstanding causes the heart to carry unnecessary pain. When we begin to see this more clearly, something inside us begins to relax. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" the mind starts asking a different question. What might this person be going through? This simple shift changes the way we experience people. Their behavior stops feeling like a personal attack and begins to look like a reflection of their inner state. And when you stop absorbing every emotion around you, the heart becomes lighter. Another powerful realization appears when you observe how different people react to the same situation in completely different ways. One person may become angry, another may remain calm, and another may laugh it off. If every reaction were truly about you, everyone would respond the same way. But they don't. This shows that people are reacting from their own minds, not from your identity. When this understanding becomes deeper, You stop trying to control how everyone sees you. You stop trying to satisfy every expectation or avoid every possible misunderstanding. You simply act with sincerity and kindness, knowing that how others interpret your actions will always be influenced by their own state of mind. This brings a quiet freedom. The heart no longer needs to carry every reaction from the outside world. And slowly, something beautiful happens. The mind becomes less defensive, less sensitive to every small behavior, less trapped in constant interpretation. Peace begins to grow in the space where personal offense once lived. You start to move through life with more calm, more understanding, and far less emotional weight. And the heart finally begins to rest. The mind's attachment to the past. One of the most common habits that quietly steals peace is the mind's attachment to the past. Many people carry old moments inside their minds as if those moments are still happening today. The body may be living in the present, but the mind keeps traveling back to things that have already ended. It often begins with memories that feel unfinished. A mistake you made years ago. A conversation that did not go the way you hoped. Something embarrassing that happened long ago but still appears in your thoughts as if it happened yesterday. The mind starts replaying the moment again and again. It analyzes every detail. It reimagines different responses. It asks endless questions. Why did I say that? Why didn't I act differently? What if I had chosen another path? But no matter how many times the mind revisits the scene, the past does not change. The moment has already passed, yet the mind continues returning to it as if it can somehow fix it by thinking harder. Many people believe this is helpful. They believe that replaying the past will bring clarity or closure. But most of the time, the opposite happens. The more the mind returns to old moments, the deeper the emotional imprint becomes. A small mistake slowly turns into a heavy memory. A simple misunderstanding grows into regret that follows a person for years. And because the mind keeps replaying the scene, the emotions attached to that moment continue to appear again and again. The body reacts as if the event is happening right now. The heart becomes tense. The mind fills with judgment and criticism. Yet the moment itself no longer exists anywhere except inside memory. This is one of the ways the mind quietly creates suffering. It keeps reopening doors that life has already closed. Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging to the past traps the mind in time. The past is not something that still exists in reality. It exists only as a memory being replayed inside the mind. But the mind often treats those memories as if they are still alive. Think about how many people carry the same regrets for years. A mistake made in youth. A relationship that ended painfully. Words spoken in anger that cannot be taken back. Instead of allowing the moment to pass, the mind holds onto it tightly. It continues judging the person you used to be. But the person who made those mistakes no longer exists in the same way. Every day changes you. Every experience adds understanding. The person you are today is not the same person who existed years ago. Yet the mind often refuses to accept this. It keeps comparing the present self to the past self and continues punishing itself for things that cannot be undone. This attachment to the past slowly drains emotional energy. Instead of learning from experiences and moving forward, the mind becomes stuck in loops of regret, guilt, or longing for what once was. Some people even replay happy moments from the past with the same intensity. They remember how things used to be and begin feeling sadness that those times are gone. In both cases, the mind is resisting the natural movement of life. Buddhist teachings often remind us that everything in life is constantly changing. Nothing stays the same forever. Every moment appears, exists briefly, and then fades away. When the mind tries to hold on to moments that have already passed, it begins fighting the natural flow of life. And whenever the mind fights reality, suffering appears. Peace becomes possible only when the mind learns to let moments complete themselves. This does not mean forgetting the past or pretending it never happened. The past can still teach valuable lessons. It can offer wisdom and understanding. But there is a difference between learning from the past and living inside it. Learning from the past allows growth. Living inside the past keeps the mind trapped in time. When awareness begins to notice this habit, something powerful starts to shift. The mind becomes more aware of when it is drifting backward into old memories. Instead of getting lost in those scenes again, awareness gently returns to the present moment. And often the present moment is far more peaceful than the mind imagined. Right now, the air is moving. Your breath is flowing. Life is quietly unfolding around you. But the mind was too busy visiting yesterday to notice it. The more often the mind returns to what is happening now, the less power old memories have. They begin to feel lighter, more distant, like stories from another chapter of life. And gradually the heart realizes something simple but profound. The past has already finished its work. It has shaped who you are today. Now life is asking you to live here, in this moment, where peace has always been waiting. Imagining problems that have not happened yet. Another quiet habit that steals a great amount of peace is the mind's tendency to imagine problems that have not even happened yet. Many people live large portions of their lives inside futures that only exist in their thoughts. The mind moves ahead of the present moment and begins creating possible scenarios. At first it may seem harmless. It feels like planning or preparing. But slowly those imagined situations begin to carry fear. You may notice the mind asking questions like these. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if something bad happens tomorrow? In just a few seconds, the mind can build an entire story about the future. It imagines conversations that have not taken place. It imagines mistakes that have not happened. It imagines disappointment before any real event even begins. The strange thing is that the body reacts to these imagined events as if they are real. The heart starts to beat faster. The chest feels tight. The mind becomes restless. A feeling of pressure begins to grow inside. But if you pause and look carefully, you may realize something important. Nothing has actually happened. You are sitting in the present moment, and yet the mind is already suffering because of something that might never even occur. This is how powerful imagination can be. The mind has the ability to create entire worlds inside itself. Sometimes those worlds are creative and helpful, but very often they become places filled with worry. Many people believe that worrying about the future helps them avoid problems. They think that by thinking through every possible negative outcome, they are somehow protecting themselves. But in reality, most of the problems we imagine never happen the way we expect them to. Life is far too complex to follow the exact script the mind writes in advance. Even when difficulties do appear, they rarely look exactly like the scenarios we imagine. The mind spends hours worrying about situations that either never happen or happen in a completely different way. Yet during all that time, peace quietly disappears. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the future has not arrived yet. It exists only as a collection of thoughts appearing in the present moment. But when the mind becomes attached to those thoughts, it begins treating them like reality. It is like watching a storm in your imagination while the sky above you is actually clear. This habit becomes even stronger when the mind repeatedly focuses on negative possibilities. The brain begins to treat those imagined fears as something important. Over time, the mind develops a pattern of expecting problems before they appear. A simple situation begins to feel threatening. A normal event begins to feel heavy with pressure. Instead of experiencing life as it unfolds, the mind is always rushing ahead, scanning the future for danger. But the future is always uncertain. No amount of worrying can fully control it. Even if we try to predict every possible outcome, life still moves in ways we cannot fully plan. Buddhist teachings often encourage people to return their awareness to the present moment because the present is the only place where life is actually happening. Right now, in this moment, many of the problems we fear are not here. The mind may be telling a story about tomorrow, but tomorrow has not arrived yet. The more attention we give to imagined fears, the more powerful they become. But when awareness gently returns to what is real right now, something begins to calm down inside. You notice your breathing. You notice the quiet space around you. You realize that this moment itself is often far simpler than the mind made it appear. This does not mean ignoring the future completely. Planning and preparation are part of life. But there is a big difference between thoughtful preparation and endless worrying. Preparation happens calmly and then the mind moves on. Worry keeps replaying the same imagined problems again and again without solving anything. The mind becomes tired, the heart becomes tense, and peace slowly fades away. When awareness becomes stronger, you begin noticing the exact moment when the mind starts building those future stories. And instead of following every imagined problem, you gently bring your attention back to what is actually here. With practice, the mind learns that it does not need to live inside every possible future. It can simply remain present, steady, and aware. And in that space, many of the fears that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their power. Comparison quietly poisons contentment. Another habit that quietly steals peace from the heart is comparison. It often begins in a very subtle way. The mind looks at another person's life and begins measuring itself against it. You see someone who appears more successful, someone who seems happier, someone who looks more confident, more admired, or more accomplished. And almost without noticing it, the mind begins asking silent questions. Why am I not there yet? Why does their life look easier than mine? Why do they seem ahead of me? At first, these thoughts may seem small, but over time they slowly change the way a person sees their own life. Instead of appreciating what is already present, the mind becomes focused on what seems to be missing. Contentment begins to fade, not because life is lacking, but because attention has shifted towards someone else's path. Comparison quietly turns life into a race that no one can truly win. There will always be someone who appears richer, more successful, more talented, or more admired. If the mind keeps looking outward for measurement, it will always find someone who seems ahead. And when the mind constantly measures itself against others, peace slowly disappears. Buddhist wisdom teaches that comparison is one of the mind's most deceptive habits. It creates dissatisfaction even when life is going well. The problem is that comparison is almost never fair or accurate. When people compare their lives to others, they usually compare their full reality to someone else's appearance. You see another person's achievements, but you do not see the struggles that came before them. You see their moments of success, but you do not see their fears, their doubts, or the private difficulties they carry. Every human life contains both joy and struggle, but comparison rarely sees the whole picture. The mind often takes someone else's best visible moment and compares it to its own quiet insecurities. And from that unfair comparison, feelings of inadequacy begin to grow. This habit has become even stronger in the modern world. People constantly see images of other lives through social media, advertisements, and public displays of success. But what we see in those moments is usually only a small fragment of reality. People naturally show their happiest moments, their achievements, their celebrations. Rarely do they show their private worries, their loneliness, their failures, or the quiet challenges they face when no one is watching. Yet the mind takes these glimpses and builds a story that their life must be better. Slowly the mind begins to believe that happiness exists somewhere else, in someone else's circumstances. But Buddhist teachings remind us that every life unfolds according to its own conditions. Every person is walking a path shaped by unique experiences, opportunities, challenges, and lessons. No two journeys are identical. When we constantly compare our progress to someone else's path, we lose sight of our own direction. The mind stops appreciating how far it has come and begins focusing only on where it believes it should be. This creates a feeling of constant dissatisfaction. Even achievements lose their joy because the mind immediately looks for someone who has done more. Peace becomes difficult to maintain when the mind is always measuring. Contentment grows only when attention returns to the present life that is actually unfolding in front of us. When you begin to observe the habit of comparison, something interesting becomes clear. The moment you stop measuring your life against others, the pressure begins to dissolve. You start noticing things that were always there but were hidden behind comparison. Simple moments begin to feel meaningful again. Progress begins to feel real again. Gratitude begins to grow naturally. You begin to understand that life was never meant to be a competition with everyone around you. Your life is a unique path of growth, learning, and experience. Some people will walk faster in certain areas. Others will face different challenges. Some will reach certain goals earlier, while others will take longer journeys. But none of these differences determine the value of your life. Peace returns when you stop looking sideways at everyone else and start walking your own path with awareness. Instead of asking how your life compares to others, the mind begins asking a much healthier question. Am I growing? Am I learning? Am I becoming a little wiser than I was yesterday? When attention shifts in this way, comparison slowly loses its power. And in the space where comparison once lived, a quiet and steady contentment begins to grow. The endless desire to control life. Many people believe that peace will finally arrive when life becomes fully under control. The mind often tells us that if everything goes according to plan, then we will finally feel calm. If people behave the way we expect, if situations unfold exactly as we hope, if the future becomes predictable, then the mind believes it will finally relax. But if you observe life closely, you begin to see that this idea creates endless tension. Life is constantly changing. Situations shift, people change their minds, plans move in unexpected directions, and events unfold in ways no one can perfectly predict. Yet the mind keeps trying to hold everything in a fixed position, as if life should behave like a machine that follows our instructions. Think about how often people try to control things around them. They try to control how others see them, how conversations unfold, how relationships develop, how their future will look, and how every plan should succeed. At first, this effort may seem reasonable. It feels responsible to plan and organize life. But the mind often moves beyond simple planning and enters a deeper need to control outcomes completely. When life follows the expected path, the mind feels temporary comfort. But the moment something changes or moves in an unexpected direction, frustration quickly appears. A plan fails. Someone behaves differently than expected. An opportunity disappears. A situation becomes uncertain. In those moments, the mind begins to resist what is happening. It starts thinking that things should not be this way. It asks why life did not follow the path that was imagined. But the truth is that life has never promised complete control. Buddhist wisdom teaches that one of the most fundamental truths of existence is impermanence. Everything is constantly changing. Every moment is moving into the next moment. Nothing remains fixed for very long. People grow, circumstances shift, and the world continues to move forward whether we are ready for those changes or not. When the mind refuses to accept this natural movement, it begins to fight reality itself. And whenever the mind fights reality, suffering appears. You can see this clearly when someone becomes deeply attached to how things should happen. The stronger that expectation becomes, the more painful it feels when life moves in another direction. But when the mind begins to understand the nature of change, something begins to soften inside. You start to see that trying to control every outcome is like trying to hold water tightly in your hands. The more you squeeze, the more it slips away. Life flows much like a river. It moves around obstacles, changes direction, and continues its course. When we try to block the flow completely, tension builds. But when we allow life to move while responding with awareness and flexibility, the experience becomes far more peaceful. This does not mean becoming passive or careless. It does not mean abandoning responsibility or effort. It simply means understanding the difference between what can be guided and what cannot be controlled. We can guide our actions. We can choose kindness, patience, and effort. We can prepare and plan with care. But the final outcome of many situations will always remain uncertain. Other people have their own thoughts and decisions. Circumstances can change without warning. Opportunities can appear and disappear. Once the mind begins to accept this truth, something remarkable happens. The heavy pressure to control everything begins to fade. Instead of constantly forcing life to behave a certain way, the mind learns to move with life. Unexpected changes no longer feel like personal failures. They begin to feel like natural parts of the journey. Frustration slowly transforms into understanding. The mind becomes more flexible, more patient, and more open to what each moment brings. And in that openness, peace begins to grow. because peace is not found by controlling every event. Peace appears when the mind stops fighting the way life naturally unfolds and learns to walk with it instead. Acting immediately on every emotion. Many people lose their peace not because of what they feel, but because of how quickly they react to what they feel. Emotions appear in the mind very quickly. Anger can rise in seconds. Fear can appear without warning. Frustration can grow from a small situation. These emotional waves are a natural part of being human. But the problem is not the emotion itself. The problem is the habit of reacting immediately. When an emotion appears, most people act on it instantly. If anger rises, harsh words follow. If frustration appears, impatience shows up in behavior. If fear enters the mind, people withdraw or make rushed decisions. In those moments, the emotion takes control of the situation. What many people do not realize is that emotions are temporary experiences. They are like waves in the ocean. They rise, they reach their peak, and then they slowly fade away. But when we react immediately, we allow those temporary waves to shape actions that can have long-lasting consequences. Think about how many arguments begin this way. A small comment triggers irritation. Without pausing, the mind responds with another sharp comment. That response triggers another reaction, and soon a small misunderstanding grows into a full conflict. Later, when the emotion fades, many people realize they spoke or acted in ways they did not truly mean. But by then, the words have already been spoken. Buddhist wisdom places great importance on the space between feeling and action. There is always a brief moment between the emotion appearing and the reaction that follows. In that small moment, awareness has the power to choose. Most people move past that moment so quickly that they never notice it. Emotion appears and action follows immediately, almost like a reflex. But when a person becomes more aware of their mind, they begin to see that brief space more clearly. Instead of reacting instantly, they pause for a moment. That pause may last only a few seconds, but those few seconds can completely change what happens next. In that pause, the mind has time to see the emotion clearly. You notice the feeling of anger, but you do not immediately follow it. You feel the wave of frustration, but you give it a moment to settle before responding. Something interesting happens during that pause. Many emotions begin to lose their intensity. Anger that felt overwhelming a few seconds earlier begins to soften. Fear that felt urgent becomes easier to understand. The mind gains clarity that was impossible when the emotion first appeared. This is why Buddhist practice often encourages mindfulness of emotions rather than immediate reaction to them. When emotions are observed instead of acted upon instantly, they begin to pass naturally. Just like clouds drifting across the sky, they appear, move through awareness, and eventually fade away. But when we react immediately, we feed those emotions with more energy. Anger creates more anger. Fear creates more worry. Frustration creates more tension. The cycle continues because the mind keeps reacting without awareness. Learning to pause changes this cycle. It allows wisdom to enter the situation. Instead of letting the first emotional impulse decide everything, the mind begins to respond with greater balance and understanding. You may still feel anger, but you no longer need to express it in harmful ways. You may still feel fear, but you can respond calmly instead of rushing into panic. Over time, this simple shift transforms the way a person experiences life. Conflicts become fewer because reactions become calmer. Relationships improve because responses become more thoughtful. Decisions become wiser because they are no longer driven by temporary emotional storms. Peace grows when the mind learns that it does not have to follow every emotion the moment it appears. Emotions are part of the human experience, but they do not need to control every action. When awareness becomes strong enough to pause before reacting, the mind becomes more stable, more patient, and more clear. And in that quiet space between emotion and reaction, true inner strength begins to appear. The ego's constant need for validation. Another quiet habit that slowly steals peace from the mind is the need to always defend the ego. Many people do not realize how much energy they spend protecting an image of themselves. Inside the mind, there is often a strong desire to appear right, respected, intelligent, or important. This inner image becomes something the mind tries to guard at all times. Whenever something challenges that image, the mind quickly becomes defensive. Someone disagrees with your opinion, and immediately the mind feels the need to prove them wrong. Someone questions your decision, and suddenly it feels like your judgment is under attack. A small criticism can begin to feel much larger than it really is. In these moments, the mind reacts as if something very important is being threatened. But if we observe carefully, what is actually being protected is not our real self. It is only an idea of who we believe we should be. The mind creates an image of identity and then works very hard to defend it. This image may be the idea that we are always correct, always capable, always respected, or always strong. When something challenges that image, discomfort appears quickly. Arguments often begin this way. Two people hold different views, and instead of simply exchanging ideas, each mind begins protecting its identity. The conversation stops being about understanding and becomes a struggle to win. But when conversations become battles, peace quietly disappears. The mind becomes tense, the body tightens, and the heart fills with irritation or frustration. All of this happens simply because the ego wants to protect the image it has created. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the self we defend so strongly is not as solid as it appears. Our thoughts, beliefs, and opinions are always changing as we grow and learn. The person you were 10 years ago did not think exactly the same way you do today. The person you will become in the future will likely see the world differently again. Yet the mind often behaves as if its current identity must remain fixed and unchallenged. This creates a very fragile sense of self. Any disagreement can feel like a threat. Any criticism can feel like an attack. Life becomes exhausting when the mind is constantly trying to protect its image. But something beautiful happens when we begin to loosen this attachment. When the need to always be right begins to soften, conversations become lighter. Disagreements stop feeling like personal battles. Instead of trying to defend every opinion, the mind becomes curious. It becomes open to listening, learning, and understanding other perspectives. You begin to see that another person having a different view does not diminish your worth. It simply reflects that every mind sees the world through its own experiences. This understanding brings great freedom. You no longer need to prove yourself in every conversation. You no longer need to correct every misunderstanding or defend every opinion. Sometimes you can simply listen. Sometimes you can smile and allow another person to think differently. Sometimes you can accept that being peaceful is far more valuable than being right. When the ego loosens its grip, the mind becomes much lighter. You stop carrying the constant pressure of defending an identity. You stop turning small disagreements into emotional struggles. Instead, the heart becomes more relaxed, more patient, and more open. And in that openness, peace begins to grow naturally. Because the moment the ego stops fighting to protect its image, the mind finally has space to rest, believing every thought without question. Another quiet habit that disturbs the mind is the tendency to believe every thought that appears. Most people rarely question their thoughts. When a thought arises in the mind, it is immediately accepted as true. If the mind says something negative about yourself, you believe it. If the mind predicts failure, you begin to expect disappointment. If the mind tells a story about someone else's intentions, you assume that story must be accurate. But when you observe the mind carefully, something surprising becomes clear. Thoughts are constantly appearing and disappearing. One moment the mind feels confident, the next moment it feels doubtful. One moment it imagines success, the next moment it predicts failure. The mind changes its narrative many times throughout the day. If every thought were completely true, these constant changes would not happen. The fact that thoughts shift so easily shows that they are not fixed truths. They are simply mental events that pass through the mind. Yet most people treat their thoughts as if they are commands or facts that must be followed. Imagine hearing a thought that says, "You are not good enough." If that thought is believed immediately, it can affect your mood, your confidence, and even your actions. But that thought is only a sentence appearing in the mind. It is not necessarily a reflection of reality. The same thing happens when the mind predicts negative outcomes. A thought may appear saying, "This will probably fail," or "People will judge you," or "Something will go wrong." If those thoughts are accepted without question, the mind begins preparing for problems that may never occur. Buddhist wisdom teaches that thoughts are like clouds passing across the sky of awareness. They appear, they change shape, and eventually they fade away. Some clouds look heavy and dark, others look light and harmless. But none of them stay in the sky forever. In the same way, thoughts move continuously through the mind. They come from past experiences, fears, habits, memories, and imagination. Because they appear so quickly, it is easy to assume they must be important or true. But many thoughts are simply echoes of past conditioning. A person who once experienced criticism may develop thoughts that constantly predict rejection. A person who has faced failure before may develop thoughts that expect failure again. These thoughts are not always reflections of the present moment. They are often reflections of past experiences repeating themselves in the mind. When a person learns to observe thoughts instead of automatically believing them, a powerful shift begins to happen. You start noticing the moment a thought appears. Instead of immediately following it, you see it for what it is, a mental event arising in awareness. The thought may still appear, but it no longer has complete control over your attention. For example, a negative thought may arise, but instead of believing it, you simply notice it. You recognize that the mind is producing a familiar pattern. In that moment, the thought begins to lose its power. It becomes just another passing cloud rather than a command that must be obeyed. This simple shift creates a great sense of freedom. The mind no longer feels trapped by every thought it produces. Instead of being pulled in many directions by endless mental stories, awareness remains calm and steady. You begin to realize that peace was never destroyed by thoughts themselves. Thoughts will always appear. That is part of how the mind functions. Peace is disturbed only when we become entangled in those thoughts and treat them as absolute truth. When awareness learns to watch thoughts come and go without clinging to them, the mind becomes quieter. The space between thoughts becomes wider. The emotional reactions connected to them become weaker. And slowly, a deeper sense of calm begins to emerge. You begin to see that you are not every thought that passes through your mind. You are the awareness that notices those thoughts. And that awareness has always been peaceful beneath the constant movement of the mind. Peace returns the moment the mind stops chasing. One of the most beautiful realizations a person can have is understanding that peace is not something you need to force into existence. It is not something that only appears when life becomes perfect. Peace is already part of the mind's natural state. The problem is that most people rarely experience this natural calm because the mind is constantly chasing something. It chases solutions, chases control, chases approval, chases certainty, and chases endless thoughts about the past and the future. The mind moves from one concern to another so quickly that it rarely stops long enough to rest. Imagine a lake on a windy day. The water becomes restless. Waves appear on the surface, and the lake begins to look chaotic. But the chaos is not coming from the water itself. It is coming from the constant movement of the wind. When the wind finally settles, something interesting happens. The water naturally becomes still again. The lake does not need to learn how to be calm. Calmness was always its natural state once the disturbance disappears. The mind works in a very similar way. Many of the habits we have explored, replaying the past, worrying about the future, comparing ourselves to others, reacting to every emotion, believing every thought, are like winds that keep disturbing the surface of the mind. As long as those winds keep blowing strongly, the mind feels restless and tense. But when awareness begins to notice these habits, the mind slowly stops feeding them with attention. Instead of chasing every thought, you simply observe it. Instead of reacting to every emotion, you allow it to pass. Instead of following every worry about tomorrow, you return to what is happening right now. Little by little, the mind stops running after every mental movement. And something surprising begins to happen. The quiet that was always underneath the noise starts to appear. Many people believe peace must be created through effort. They think they must fix every problem, control every situation, and solve every thought before calmness can arrive. But Buddhist wisdom points to a very different understanding. Peace appears naturally when the mind stops struggling so much. It appears in the simple moments when the mind is not chasing the past or the future. It appears when attention rests gently in the present moment. Think about the rare times when you have felt completely calm. Perhaps it was during a quiet walk, watching the sky, listening to the sound of rain, or sitting in silence without any urgency. In those moments, the mind was not trying to control everything. It was not arguing with reality. It was simply present. And in that presence, peace revealed itself. This is why mindfulness is such an important practice in Buddhist teachings. Mindfulness is not about forcing the mind to become quiet. That usually creates even more tension. Mindfulness is about noticing what is happening in the mind without adding more struggle. When a thought appears, you notice it. When an emotion rises, you observe it. When the mind begins to drift into old habits, you gently bring your attention back to the present moment. This gentle awareness slowly weakens the habits that disturb the mind. The more the mind learns to observe rather than chase, the more space begins to open inside. Thoughts still appear, emotions still arise, and life continues to move with all its changes. But something inside remains calm. You begin to realize that peace was never something far away that had to be achieved. It was always quietly present beneath the noise of the mind. The moment the mind stops chasing every thought, every worry, every story, that natural calm begins to reveal itself again. And when a person experiences this clearly, even for a brief moment, they understand something deeply important. Peace was never missing. It was simply waiting for the mind to become still enough to notice it. Before we end, take a quiet moment and allow your heart to slow down. Let us make a sincere prayer for peace within our minds and our lives. May your mind become calm like still water. May the storms of worry slowly settle within you. May the weight of old thoughts gently leave your heart. May you find the wisdom to see your thoughts without becoming trapped by them. May you learn to release what no longer belongs to you. May your heart grow lighter with every passing day. May the past no longer hold your mind captive. May fear of the future lose its power over you. May you learn to rest peacefully in the present moment. May understanding replace anger. May patience replace frustration. May compassion grow in every corner of your heart. May you walk through life with clarity, with balance, and with a calm spirit. May you discover that true peace has always been quietly waiting within you. And may your mind return again and again to that quiet place of awareness where peace naturally lives.